What's up, ladies and gentlemen, and here we are taking a look at the Blood Death Knight. What all are we looking at in this aspect? Well, you're still looking at the same blood decay that you always known. You're going to be looking at a lot of self-healing, you're using your shield still, but the other thing you're looking at is the way that you actually build bone shields. Still pretty solid, but with the addition to Morrowind, the gameplay has increased a little bit. Still a fairly easy tank to end up getting used to, and with that, let's go ahead and check on the abilities.
So here we are taking a look at the abilities, and the very first thing that we're going to come up to is Anti-Magic Shell. Not a whole lot's changed with this ability. It's still going to be a very large magic absorption spell on a 1-minute cooldown, but it also ends up generating runic power. Not a lot going on here, but still works pretty nice for a generalized 5-second duration CD on a 1-minute cooldown itself. Asphyxiate is actually baked right into the core of your abilities, no longer a talent. 45-second cooldown, lifts the enemy target off the ground, crushing their throat with dark energy and stunning them for 5 seconds. Just a general CC to where you'll, if you've played a DK before, you'll know exactly how it works, but it works pretty solid. Blood Boil. A little bit of a change here, not a lot. But what it's going to do is it's going to deal a very decent amount of shadow damage and affects all enemies within 10 yards with Blood Plague. Now, Blood Plague, it's going to just generally be a solid dot that you end up applying, and as you can see, just standing here, it's going to apply it to everything around, so nothing great, just the usual. Blood Drinker's a talent, we'll go over that later. Same with Bone Storm. Consumption is your artifact ability. Now, what it's going to do is strike all enemies in a frontal cone with an attack that deals some pretty high physical damage, and it heals you for all of that damage done. So this is going to be great for ad tanking. More or less, the more that you have in front of you, the more healing you're going to end up doing, and it's a great pop up. I mean, you can basically, at 75,000, you're looking at about a tenth of your health per mob. This is going to be a very solid heal, and on a 45-second cooldown, it's not spammy, but it's better than most. Control Undead, it's just going to be a CC. It's going to let you do exactly what it says, control the target undead creature up to level 104, which is always going to be a level higher than what you are, forcing it to do your bidding for 5 minutes. Dancing Rune Weapon. It's instant, it's a 3-minute cooldown, still one of your most solid defensive abilities, considering the fact that it gives you 40% parry, and also mimics your attack, so you get a little bit of an additional damage. Dark Command is instant, 8-second cooldown, and this is going to be your general taunt. Death and Decay, it's part of your core rotation now. You're going to want to keep this thing on cooldown as much as possible, because you do have an ability that refreshes this to where you can reuse it. But the other reason why is because it corrupts the target ground area and doing the shadow damage like we normally end up knowing. If you end up looking, here you go. There's your general, alright, and whenever you're in this and you end up using Heart Strike, we can step up real quick. Heart Strike's going to end up hitting all additional targets that are close to you, and your melee attacks, we'll go over it here in a second, have a chance of refreshing it as long as Blood Plague's up. Deathgate, this is just going to take you back to Ebb and Hold, which is your class hall, and if you end up using it again, it'll end up taking you close to where you ended up using your Ebb and Gate before. Death Grip, this is just your general Death Grip, no changes here at all, except for the fact that instead of it directly taunting him, it increases threat you generate against that target by 200% for 3 seconds. A very large threat generator. Normally, if you're in any of the other specs, that last part is not added in there for the threat generation, just for the blood decay itself. Death Strike, 40 runic power, and this is part of your bread and butter rotation and what we would consider your actual active mitigation. Focuses dark power into a strike that deals 64,000 physical damage and heals you for 20% of all damage taken in the last 5 seconds. Minimum of 7% maximum health. We'll go over your mastery, but it is still the blood shield, which plays pretty solid into this whole ability, and this is going to be one of your main active mitigations. Death's Caress, it's basically useless unless you take a specific talent that makes it to where Blood Boil no longer puts a Blood Plague, and this is going to be your way to end up doing it. Now, with this thing costing 1 rune and the fact that it only does 10,000 damage compared to Blood Boil, which is not on a long enough cooldown for it to really matter, but it deals almost 40,000 damage and doesn't cost anything. Really, Blood Boil is going to take this thing's priority in any given situation, and there's no point of using it because you'll already have Blood Plague up. Now, with this being said, there is a talent in there that's going to give this thing some abilities, but I don't think it's worth it, and we'll go over that in the talents a little bit later. Gorfine's Grasp is still here. Normally a 3-minute cooldown, but I do have a talent that drops it down. It's going to work the same thing. Enemies within 20 yards of a hostile or friendly target, depending on what you have targeted at that time, and hit this button within their 20-yard range, it's going to pull all hostile enemies to that target's location. Really, it's a great piece to end up gathering up mobs. And with it being on a 3-minute cooldown, I saw some great use in it being a 2-minute, so I took the talent for it. Heart Strike. This is going to be your spammable ability and your main runic power generator. What this is going to do is it's physical damage and reduces enemies' movement speed by 50% for 8 seconds. And it'll also hit up to 4 targets, main target and then 3 others if you're standing in your Blood Boil. Pretty solid damage in AoE and single target situations for a filler spell. Mark of Blood is a talent. We'll go over that a little later. Morrowind. This is active mitigation number 2, and it's not really an active mitigation as much as an ability that puts up some mitigation around you. Very hard-hitting physical ability, and it generates 3 charges of Bone Shield. Now, Bone Shield hasn't had a lot of change from live, except for the fact that it's baked into this ability now. And with that, it's going to give you a barrier, which reduces all damage you take by 20% and increasing your haste by 10%. Each damaging attack consumes a charge. Lasts 30 seconds or until all charges are consumed. Fairly easy to keep up. There's a couple talents that play into this quite nicely, and we will go over them. But basically, what we'll end up looking at here, as you end up hitting Morrowind, you'll see the charges are actually building up on this additional bar, so it's easy to track. One of the great Blizzard UI items that ended up getting added in. So 9 stacks up there just off of hitting this 3 times at the cost of 2 runes per, or 2 runes per cast. It does get a little expensive, but it's still fairly easy to maintain, and this is normally, as long as you're sitting at about 7 or more, you really will end up focusing on Heart Strike instead of Morrowind. Mind Freeze is our next ability, and this is just going to be your interrupt. Path of Frost, same as it's always been. It's going to allow you and your party or raid members within 50 yards to walk on water. Raise allies, still your battle res. Rune Forging, generalized, pretty specific. Razor Ice is going to be for Frost. Fallen Crusader, Unholy. And then Stone Skin Gargoyle is going to be for your tank, which would be Blood, what we're looking at now. So this is going to be the general one you're going to use for tanking. Now, if you're not taking a lot of damage, you can... There's been some people that prefer Rune of the Fallen Crusader for the increased strength, which whenever the strength procs, it also acts as a parry increase also. So there's a little bit of a wax and wane depending on how some people end up doing it, but normally Rune of the Stone Skin Gargoyle is going to smooth out your damage a bit more. Vamp Blood, and I just used it. So what we're looking at, you can see I'm over 1,000,000 health all of a sudden, and that's due to Vamp Blood, and once it ends up wearing off, it's going to drop right back down, and boom, 777k. What is this ability doing? It's going to increase my maximum health by 30% and all healing I receive by 30% for 10 seconds. Just great for larger incoming damages. If you're afraid it's going to do more damage than what you can end up mitigating, you'll pop Vampiric Blood on its 1.5 minute cooldown, and it's going to allow you to survive through it and just kind of adjust your percentages of damage that you really end up taking, and giving the healers a chance to get you healed back up. Wraithwalk, the new Death Knight mobility. Now, it's a 1-minute cooldown, and all this does is increase your movement speed by 70% for 3 seconds and breaks root effects. During this time, you cannot be suppressed or any way in movement, so you just constantly end up going, and boom, there it is. And it'll last for 3 seconds, or until you actually attack. If you try and do an attacking ability, it will break this early. Now we're into the passives. Crimson Scourge. This is what I was talking about. Your auto attacks on targets infected with your Blood Plague have a chance to make your next Death and Decay cost no runes and reset its cooldown. So basically, while you're sitting here doing the damage, you want to always make sure that Blood Plague is up. And we'll just sit here and auto attack, and you'll end up seeing the proc hopefully real quick. It usually lasts pretty Usually goes by pretty quick. We'll get some haste here from our Morrowind. And normally they end up proccing a lot faster than this. But what you'll see is you'll see like the little markers come down each side here as it's up. And we'll reapply Blood Plague. And what it'll do is you'll actually get an indicator up here like you normally would. And there it is. Looks like the indicator's not working. It'll automatically end up proccing and showing you that this thing is ready to be used again. It does make the button glow, and they did have an indicator up here on the front to show you, but it looks like it might be disabled, so I don't know if they're going to go on with that. It still gives you notifications so you can keep this thing up on your core rotation because it is a lot of additional damage, and it plays into your abilities a bit more as you build talents. Your Mastery Blood Shield, as mentioned, what this is going to do is each time you heal yourself with Death Strike, you gain 28% of the base amount healed as a physical damage absorption shield. Also increases your attack power by 14%. Very solid Mastery, has been for a long time, and especially with the absorption shields being a little tweaked for this expansion, this is a very solid piece. On a Pale Horses here, basically just increasing your mounting speed by 20%. That's all it is. Mount speed increase. And Veteran of the Third War, your tanking passive increases stamina by 25% and armor by 15%. That's going to be it for the abilities. Let's go ahead and move right on to the talents. Here we are looking at the talents, and level 56, Bloodworms is back, and sorry about the little cutoff up top there, but your auto attack critical strikes have a chance to summon a Bloodworm. Bloodworms deal minor damage to the target for 15 seconds, then burst, healing you for 5% of the missing health. If you drop below 50% health, your Bloodworms will immediately burst and heal you. This is a great little catch-up mechanic if you do end up falling underneath, but unfortunately, the healing is fairly minimal. It does end up having a solid play to it, but just like in the past with Bloodworms, it's uncontrolled. There's no real passive anything. It's really passive, actually. It's just does not fit. Heartbreaker, passive. Heartstrike generates 3 additional runic power per target hit. This is great if you're lacking on rune generation and will give you a couple more, especially in AoE situations. You'll be able to end up using your Death Strike quite a bit more often. And then you've got Blood Drinker. It's 1 rune, it's channeled. Drains 116,199 health from the target over 3 seconds. You can move, parry, dodge, and use defensive abilities during this channel. Now, I only have this active so I can end up showing it off, and what you're looking at is, yes, you can end up moving, but the thing about this ability that I don't like is anything else will not allow you to, you can't do anything else during this period, except for defensive abilities, so it is a little on the light side, and for 30-second cooldown, it is a solid amount of healing, but it's not that great, and I normally went with Heartbreaker instead, because not only was I getting that extra runic power pooling, what you're looking at is getting more Death Strikes, which also in turn is greatly affected by your Mastery, and gives you some more shielding in the process. So normally it would be Heartbreaker that I would take. Rapid Composition's passive, your Death and Decay deals damage 50% more often, and while in your Death and Decay, you generate 50% more runic power. What this is going to do is just give you some additional generated runic power and some more Death and Decay damage if you're getting lucky with the procs. Very solid piece on this, but it's still, the procs are going to be based on your auto attacks, so therefore you're looking at a single target situation also. Really, it's kind of a choice in this whole line of what you would prefer. So with that, we'll go on to Soul Gorge. Instant. Consume your blood plagues within 30 yards, dealing very minimal shadow damage with 2 infected enemies, and empowering you for 24 seconds with up to 15% rune generation per plague. Plagues closer to expiration grant more rune regeneration. Blood Boil no longer applies Blood Plague. So what this is going to do is give you a bunch of rune regeneration for a 24-second period. The only problem is you have to actually go through and multi-dot using Death's Caress now to end up putting up Blood Plague. And each one of those is going to cost you a rune. So it's kind of a back and forth on the way that this will end up playing. You're going to spend runes now to end up getting more runes. You can get this pretty solid, but you do have a time limit. You have to end up getting these as close to expiring as possible, and then pop this ability to get the rune regeneration. Really interesting gameplay, but it also made it clunky and pretty much just a headache. But Blood Boil, no longer applying Blood Plague, just makes Blood Boil an AoE damage, and that's it. Not very useful whatsoever, and then you also have to remember right after you end up using this, you want to put Blood Plague right back up on the main target that you're attacking, just for the simple fact that if you don't have it up there, you're losing out on chances of proccing your Death and Decay. This has a real wax and wane to the ability, and some people out there are going to play with it and really enjoy it, other people are going to hate it, and I don't really care for it. There's enough rune regeneration already to where I don't have to worry about this too terribly much. Then you have Spectral Deflection. Attacks that deal more than 25% of your maximum health will consume a second Bone Shield charge to further reduce the damage. So if something does hit you for over 25% of your maximum health and brings you down past that 75% mark, and if you have 2 Bone Shields available, instead of it consuming 1 and only doing 20% reduction, it will consume 2 and do a 40% reduction. Pretty solid. Pretty nice for those large hits that would normally end up spiking out the Death Knight prior, to where you'd see those spikes, so where you'd get hit and it would knock you flat on your ass, and if you weren't quick with your Death Strike, you'd end up dead. But if you were quick with it, it didn't matter anyways, because then you got that shield on top, and this is just made to kind of eliminate that spiky damage. Level 58, Ossuary. While you have at least 5 Bone Shield charges, the cost of Death Strike is reduced by 5 runic power. Additionally, your maximum runic power is increased by 10. So yes, instead of being 100, it is 110. This is fairly easy to do. As long as you don't have a real fast hitting boss or a whole bunch of mobs that just constantly keep hitting you, even then it's still pretty easy to end up keeping up. You're just going to hit Morrowind more than you would Heartstrike. That's the only real base change that you'd end up seeing in this. This is where Morrowind, it still does a lot of damage. Heartstrike is going to be more overall because of the rune cost that it ends up using. Still a very solid piece, and with the cost being reduced on Death Strike, it just felt pretty solid. Blood Tap is still here, consumes Shadowy Essence, basically generating 1 rune. Recharge time reduced by 1 second whenever Bone Shield charge is consumed, so this plays into your active mitigation to reduce it. These are on a 1-minute recharge. Basically, you get 2 charges, and you can end up using them whenever you feel comfortable. If you do need an additional rune, this is still here, so you can have a little bit of a change in the gameplay. Instead of just being completely out of runes, if you didn't manage them correctly, this will end up saving you. Anti-Magic Barrier. This is just going to increase your maximum health by 25% for 10 seconds. This is going to be a lot like Vampiric Blood without the healing increase. So if you do have a large ability that's going to hit you, you can hit Anti-Magic Shell. And if they turn around and hit you with this magic ability and let's say it soaks out the whole shell, and they go with the physical ability right after that, it's more than likely not going to kill you because of this health bonus. Level 60, Mark of Blood. Now, since the first iteration I did, this has changed a lot. Instead of this being a cooldown, they turned it into an ability, and it's really fun to play with. 30 runic power places a Mark of Blood on an enemy for 25 seconds. The enemy's damaging auto attacks will also heal their victim for 2% of maximum health. I found this to be pretty great to spam around. Instead of just using Death Strike, I would spam this ability around on 2, maybe 3 mobs, and I would never end up looking like I took any damage at all, because 2% of my maximum health is usually higher than what their actual physical hits are doing. The only place where this does not help you at all whatsoever is on caster mobs, because normally caster mobs don't hit, they cast something and it usually hurts way worse than what 2% of your maximum health is. But this, on multiple mobs and even some bosses, the bosses would end up hitting quite quickly, and you would end up noticing the healing popping you back up until they do another big ability, and then it would bring you down a little, and then you'd slowly. Really good wax and wane, and it was a fun ability to play with, so I took it. Then you have Red Thirst. Passive, spending runic power will decrease the remaining cooldown on Vampiric Blood by 2 seconds per 10 runic power. Just keeping Vampiric Blood, you're going to have more reason to end up using it, and with 2 seconds per 10 runic power, you're going to see it coming back up quite frequently. Tombstone, instant, another new ability. It's a 1-minute cooldown. Consume all bone shield charges. For each charge consumed, you gain 3 runic power and absorb damage equal to 3% of your maximum health for 8 seconds. It's a huge shield. It'll last for 8 seconds, takes a lot of additional damage out, but 3% of your maximum health. If you have this thing capped out at 10, that's going to be 30% of your maximum health over 8 seconds in a shield on a 1 minute cooldown. This is a very, very solid absorption. 30% of my maximum health, 777,000, right around, what, 200,000, 250,000? Just off the top of my head. I really don't know how well this is going to play out because of that 1 minute cooldown, but if you do have a burst period or a mechanic that you know of that you need to end up absorbing, this is going to be great. Or in clutch situations to where you don't feel like you've got enough runes, but you've got bone shield charges and you feel like you're going to get crushed down, this will end up saving your ass until a healer can get you picked back up. I see a lot of real good priority with this, but currently in the 5-mans that I've been running, it just wasn't worth it. But in raids and later on mythics, this will probably end up doing really well. Tightening Grasp. I mentioned this in the abilities. This is the one that reduces Gorfine's Grasp by 60 seconds, and your Death and Decay also reduces movement speed of enemies within its radius by 70%. Just keeps things packed in all nice and tight together. Tremble Before Me. Enemies damaged by your Death and Decay have a chance to cower in place for 3 seconds, but cannot suffer from this effect more than once per 10 seconds. Damage may cancel this effect. Basically what this is telling you, Death and Decay lasts 10 seconds, so when you throw this down, they can have a chance of trembling for 3 seconds every time you throw down Death and Decay. Doesn't mean that they will, but you have a chance of reducing your damage by having them cower. March of the Damned, passive. Wraithwalk lasts 50% longer and breaks stuns, snares, root effects when cast. Instead of lasting 3 seconds, this is going to last 4.5 seconds, and instead of it just breaking root effects, it also had stuns and snares. That's the only change that you're looking at. It still is on a 1 minute cooldown though. Then you've got level 90, Will of the Necropolis. It's passive. Damage taken below 35% health is reduced by 20%. Just a nice little buffer. If you feel like you're going to be smacked around a lot, this is going to help you out. Rune Tap, 1 rune, 25-second recharge. Consume a rune to reduce all damage taken by 25% for 3 seconds. This is an interesting ability. You do have 2 charges of this ability, and basically whenever you use it, it's going to put the mark on you. You do get the visual throughout the whole thing. It's just going to reduce damage taken by 25% for 3 seconds. So if, again, just another damage mitigation at the cost of a rune, but you still have a cooldown on it. You can't keep this thing up at all times, which would be overpowered as hell. Very nice if you're looking at timing for another large ability that you know is going to do some damage to you. Foul Bulwark, passive. Each charge of Bone Shield increases your maximum health by 2%. Now, this kind of leaves you at a little bit of a buffer, but it gives you an incentive to keep your Bone Shields in that 7+ mark. An additional 14 to 20% increased health may not seem like a lot, but as I've shown before, 777,000. Let's take this up to a real quick 10. Well, hell, even 9. Now you're looking at 917,000. That means, okay, 933. So you're looking at just under 200,000 additional health. That's going to be a life or death situation. Now this is going to fluctuate quite a bit, but if you're at those 10 stacks and you end up remaining in that ballpark range, you're still going to have that additional health to cushion and give you a little bit to work with in the fact that, hey, you're already working off of your Death Strike, which is doing X amount of damage, but also a minimum of 7% of your maximum health. If you can keep this stacked up and keep your Death Strike going, you're just going to constantly be shielded for a bit more. Seems a little wonky, but at the same time, this is going to be a great modifier on your health to end up helping for larger damage situations. Bone Storm. 10 to 100 runic power, instant and 1 minute cooldown. A whirl of bone and gore batters nearby enemies every 1 second, dealing minimal shadow damage every 1 second, healing you for 1% of your maximum health every time it deals damage. Lasts 1 second per 10 runic power spent. Now, if you've got your runic power to where it's almost capped and you end up throwing this out, that's going to be 10% of your health that's healed back. Blood Mirror. Melee range, instant, 2-minute cooldown. Afflict an enemy with Blood Mirror for 10 seconds. While active, 20% of any damage dealt to you is redirected to the target. Basically, this is going to take 20% of the damage and take it and throw it on the target that you've thrown it on. So if you're tanking a bunch of ads, per se, you can throw this on the main boss. And then, or if you're doing ad tank, I should say, if there's a fight like that, you can throw this on the main target and it's going to redirect all the damage you're taking, or 20% of the damage you're taking, to that target instead. Really interesting ability, and I see some good play with this one, but currently, yet again, you're not taking enough damage in these regular 5-mans for it to really matter. Purgatory, an unholy pact that prevents fatal damage instead of absorbing incoming healing equal to the damage prevented, lasting 3 seconds. So yeah, this is basically the same ability that we have on live. With this, let's go ahead and move straight on to the artifact ability. Alright, starting off nice and peachy with the skins. Maw of the Damned. Here's your normal regular version that you get right up front, and it looks sweet. Love it. See it sucking in the souls. It's just super pissed off looking, and it fits the theme well. Then you've got the purple. We'll let it spin a little bit more. The green, the blue. We'll let it spin to the backside here so you can end up seeing all these color schemes. It's a really nice look with the way that the model's got the like the little runes in the back too. Very complete model. Unlike some of them to where they don't look as complete, like they were real basic. Especially like the BM Hunters. Theirs were real bad. And here you have it. Probably my favorite color scheme for the main. And then Blood Maw. This thing just gets wicked. The purple, green. We'll let it spin yet again. It's just a wicked looking piece. It almost looks, I'm trying to think of the word for it, but it's almost like a Naga influenced with the way that they've got the snake ribs down the side. The way that it's got those blades in between. Really interesting. We're going to let it spin, spin, spin. Here we go. There you have it. Soul Reaper. There's been a lot of scythes this one. And this is probably one of the weaker looking scythes. It's still great looking, don't get me wrong. Especially this gray model. We'll let it spin again. But this piece here, I've seen a lot of the scythes. You've got the Balanced Druid that's got the scythe. You've got the Affliction Lock that's got the scythe. Both of them already have one. And now you're looking at this here, and it's not a bad looking piece at all. I love the caged look, like, towards the back. It gives it a very brutal look. But it almost feels like they're overdoing it with this style model. A lot of people enjoy this model, so I'm not going to say much more than that, but oh, there you have the different colors. And then Executioner, your PvP one. And it looks like they butchered poor Illidan, took his blindfold and threw it on this one. We'll let it spin around a bit. Not a bad looking piece. I think we've seen this model or something pretty close to it in a PvP set before. But it's not horrible. It's not one of the greatest. Well, let me take this back. I'm saying it's not horrible, it's not the greatest, but it is way better than some of them. It is on the top end for sure. Then there's your other color schemes. And with this, let's go ahead and look at the traits. Alright, here we are looking at the artifact traits. And again, Consumption, your main ability. It's 45-second cooldown. It's going to strike all enemies in front of you for pretty high physical damage in a cone in front of you and heals you for 100% of the damage. This 45-second cooldown is an awesome heal every 45 seconds. Just make sure you're timing this ability right, and if you've got enough mobs in front of you or enough ads, this is going to pop you right back up. First thing you get right out of the box, though, is increasing your physical damage done by 8%, and that's going to be Sanguinary Affinity. Next up, we got Vamp Fangs. Vampiric Blood increases your maximum health by an additional 5% and increases all healing received by an additional 5%. That's going to be 5, 10, or 15%. And that's going to be off of the base 30% you already get. So 35, 40, or 45% of an is what you're going to be looking at taking this ability. It makes Vamp Blood a very solid cooldown. It already is already, but this just makes it even better. Then you've got Rattling Bones. Maw Rend has a 30% chance to generate an additional charge of Bone Shield. So instead of building 3 Bone Shields, it'll actually generate a 4th. Grim Perseverance, rank 0 of 3, increases your parry chance by 1, 2, or 3%. Hey, no damage is always good damage. Skeletal Shattering, rank 0 of 1. Each time Bone Shield absorbs damage, it has a chance equal to your critical strike chance to absorb an additional 8% of that damage. This gives you a chance instead of the base 20. If you've got enough crit, it's going to give you 28% damage reduction. Coagulopathy increases damage done by Blood Plague by 8, 16, or 24%. These are some of the damaging abilities, and this really ends up helping ramp the damage of the Blood DK because they start off on the lower end of the tanks for amount of damage done. This helps out a ton, and you've got a couple more that are going to be just like this. Bone Breaker, rank 0-3, increases damage done by Maw Rend by 8, 16, or 24%. There's the second one. We've got more. Blood Feast, rank 0-1. Heart Strike heals you for 25% of the damage it deals. Awesome. Not only are you healing through just about everything else, you're going to get healed for the Heart Strike damage, which is basically your bottom rotation filler spell. But still, it does a decent amount of damage, and this is going to help out. Ironheart, rank 0-3. Increase your armor by 2, 4, or 6%. It's just going to help on the faster or more melee-specific fights. This is going to be a great addition to the mitigation due to the fact armor is all physical damage reduction. All-Consuming Rot, rank 0-3. Increases damage done by Death and Decay by 8, 16, and 24. But wait, there's more of these. There's another one that's going to be just like this. Unending Thirst, rank 0-1. While Blood Shield is active, you gain 50% leech, and damage dealt by Death Strike is increased by 50%. This is a great way not only to end up healing yourself up after using your Blood Shield, or if you've got Blood Shield up already, but this is a great way of increasing your Blood Shield through the roof. It's just going to be absolutely insane amounts of damage through both Death Strike and your actual leech. Alright, Vein Render, rank 0-3, increases damage done by Heart Strike by 8, 16, and 24, probably even 25%. This is going to be the last one, I think, of all the damage abilities, but you can see, Heart Strike, Death and Decay, Maw Rend, Blood Plague, all of your main abilities that you end up using for generalized damage are going to be increased by almost 25%, if not 25% when it's completed. Some of these are a little wonky on the way they set up. So you're looking at some insane damage increase through your actual artifact. We'll move on. Mouth of Hell, rank 0-1. Dancing Rune Weapon summons a second copy of Maw the Damned. While Dancing Rune Weapon is active, your Maw Rend will generate an additional charge of Bone Shield. While Dancing Rune Weapon is up, you will actually have a Maw the Damned out there, instead of just the regular Dancing Rune Weapon that you're used to seeing, and it's going to still mimic. Apparently, I guess it'll do more damage. It doesn't say, but you're also looking at, instead of generating 3 charges of Bone Shield, you're going to generate a 4th charge. Dance of the Darkness, rank 0-3, increases the duration of Dancing Rune Weapon by 2, 4, or 6 seconds. Really nice to end up seeing that. Meat Shield, rank 0-3, increases your stamina by 1, 2, or 3%. We have a shit ton of stamina already, but we can always use more because those harder hits do affect us a little bit more as a Death Knight compared to some, and this is just going to help out. Umbilicus Eternus, rank 0-1. After Vampiric Blood expires, you absorb damage equal to 5 times the damage your Blood Plague dealt during Vamp Blood. So this is going to put a shield on you for 5 times the damage your Blood Plague dealt during Vampiric Blood. If you use this in a single target, not a whole hell of a lot of shielding. If you use it during an AoE situation, okay, God mode just kicked in. Thank you very much. Now with this is going to be it for our artifact traits. Let's move on to the gameplay.
The Blood DK and its infinite health regeneration. What an amazing class. Well, to a point. This spec does very well, but it is also very simplified, just like the Protection Paladin. Currently, it is what I would consider... Protection Paladin is by far going to be the easier of them to play, of the tanks, and then you've got the Blood DK, which is right there next to it. And the reason for this is, again, it's all through damage absorption and healing. You do have a bit more timing on the Blood DK than what you do with the Prot Pally, as where the Prot Pally is like a DPS. But we're talking about the Blood DK. So what are we looking at here? Okay, general thing to look for in almost any circumstance is going to be, where are my Bone Shield stacks? How many do I have? Do I need to end up spending the runes on Morrowind to build more, or do I not? So on and so forth. If depending on how you talent, it's going to definitely depend on how you play, so we're going to go general basics here. And you want to keep your Bone Shields up at all times. Generally, 5+. Very simple to end up doing. You can end up getting it off of your very first 2 casts of Morrowind because you generate 3 charges of Bone Shield each time you cast it. Very simple to end up doing. Not a whole lot going on there. Now, the other thing you're looking at is applying your Blood Plague, whether it's going to be through Death's Caress or if you're using Blood Boil. Now, with this ability, keeping your Blood Plague up is going to be a very solid choice because your auto attacks are going to have a chance of resetting your Death and Decay. Your Death and Decay has now turned into one of your main abilities. It is going to be in your core rotation, whether single target or AoE. It's just that simple. They've turned it into a main ability. Getting the free procs on it to where it doesn't cost a rune and it also resets the charges is just only going to further help you out. So let's go down to a breaking point of what this thing's about. Let's say in an ad tank or mobs, we're just going to do regular AoE tanking here, guys. We're going to start off more than likely tossing out Death and Decay. You still have Gorfiend's Grasp if you need to end up getting everybody brought into that Death and Decay, even though it is on a 2-minute or 3-minute cooldown, 2-minute if you reduced it. Really still a solid ability. And then you're going to want to go straight into your Morrowinds, build your Bone Shields, make sure they stay up, Heart Strike to end up hitting everything, and then Death Strike whenever your health drops. Not a lot has really changed on the gameplay of the Death Knight. If you do end up getting really low, you have Consumption, which is your 45-second artifact cooldown, which is going to hit all targets in front of you for a very high amount of physical damage and heal you for 100% of that damage. Again, not a lot going on there. The other thing is Blood Boil, unless you talented out of it, is still going to apply Blood Plague to everything, and it's just going to be solid for AoE tanking. Let's go ahead and look at a boss fight. Now with the boss fights, you've got a couple major cooldowns that are going to help you out. You've got Vampiric Blood, which is still on 1.5 minute cooldown. It's going to increase your maximum health by 30% and increase all healing received by 30% for 10 seconds. Just a very solid cooldown for whenever you get ready to take a huge damage hit. This is going to help you survive that, and it's also going to allow Death Strike to end up healing you up for a little bit more after you end up healing, and it helps your healers out. Then you've got Dancing Rune Weapon, 3-minute cooldown, summons a rune weapon for 8 seconds that mirrors your melee attacks. Use this when you feel like you're going to get a lot of real quick jabs. The 40% parry chance ends up helping a lot if it's a real fast hitting boss or a fast hitting ability. Not a lot has really changed on that either. So what has changed? Okay, your Bone Shield mechanic. Instead of it just being a fire and forget, now you actually have to build the Morrowinds. And your spec. Your spec is going to be the main thing that you deal with. Now, for me, I ended up taking Mark of Blood. So whenever I'd end up pulling something, I would end up always making sure that Mark of Blood was on there, and I refresh it every 25 seconds to make sure that I was getting the best benefit out of it. Each attack healing for 2% of my maximum health was just amazing to end up seeing. But all in all, with these tanks, there's not a lot that's really changed with the Blood DK. There's been a few time changes on cooldowns, and really the rotation itself hasn't gone too far from where it was. Blood Boil is still going to be part of your main core rotation. Heart Strike is going to be part of your rotation. Death Strike is going to be your active mitigation still to end up healing you and giving you a good shield. You've got Consumption, which is all brand new. And then, depending on how you ended up speccing, you might have Mark of Blood, or you may end up playing Morrowind differently. You're also going to have Death and Decay that's baked into your main rotation. A lot of different stuff in there. But not a whole hell of a lot's changed on the actual gameplay. It's still a fairly simple tank to end up playing. It's fun, and really, if you want to end up taking on content and never dying, this is a great spec, because they can heal themselves for just about any purpose at all. And with this, guys, let's go ahead and take a look at the logs.
So here we are, we're taking a look at the logs, and the main thing that we're going to end up looking at through here is not only where the damage is coming from, which generally, this is a single target fight, this is the Wrath of Ashara. You're looking at Heart Strike, Melee, Blood Boil, Death Strike, Blood Plague, all these different items. Death and Decay, quite low on the damage. Doesn't do a whole hell of a lot. Bone Storm, decent amount of damage. Morrowind, Consumption. Again, the damage is not here until after you start powering up your artifact. Heart Strike is your hardest hitting ability by all means. Melee, Blood Boil. All in all, this is pretty decent, but this is not what we're really looking at as a tank. We're looking at where the damage is taken. General damage taken. It's going to be from Melee, Heaving Sands, Tidal Waves, Surging Waters. Let's take a look at the actual healing here. Okay, so Bone Shield healed me for the most in a single target situation. Not a whole hell of a lot on here. Then Mark of Blood. Again, very fun piece to play with. Death Strike, Blood Shield. I didn't take enough spiky damage for Death Strike to really end up taking off. Consumption did a decent amount of healing. So, with this being looked at, what are we really looking at? All these different healing abilities. You're looking at the damage taken. So, let's take a look at the resource and see where the health actually lied. And again, Death Strike wasn't really there to end up helping out too much, because when you look at the grid here, the health never dropped down past 75%. Where Death Strike really takes off is when you take those really big dips and it drops you down, then you use Death Strike and it'll pop you right back up in most situations. That's where Death Strike becomes very useful. So in your healing, you're just looking at base, solid, overall healing coming right on through. Now, I don't normally do this, but this is where the comparison would lie in a general healing situation. And if you look, there's not a lot of additional healing going on already. You've got Remora here, and then you've got me. There's times when they weren't even healing. There's not a lot of healing going on, period. But with my generalized healing here, as you can see, 35,000, 22,000 on the actual active healing. There's not a lot going on, period. Plain and simple. It was a generalized, easy going fight. Now, again, back to the resources, you end up looking at the health, not a lot going on there. Now let's go ahead and swap it over to like Serpentix. There's a lot more damage. You can see where the actual spikes go down. Healing right here. Alright, Consumption ended up popping me way up, but now Death Strike's going to be more towards the top. And again, the reason for that is going to be the way that the damage is done. The spikier the damage gets, the more healing Death Strike's going to allow you to do, the more shielding you're going to get. And that's where the play ends up going. You have to have these spike moments for you to actually take off. And again, Death Strike was a little higher up than what the rest of them were because of the way that it played out. King Deepbeard, Mark of Blood, Death Strike, and again, spike situations on damage or in healing, you're going to see where the health actually ended up tanking down a bit, and then boom, I'll end up knocking it back up with the healing from Death Strike. That's just the way it ends up going. Mark of Blood played out very nicely over this one. And the reason why it did so well on this one was, one, it was kept up. It was a 4.97 second or 4.97% overheal in some situations. But that's because when you look at this overall right through here, what are you mainly looking at? Well, he's a physical boss. He's going to end up doing more melee damage than anything else, and each time he would hit me, I actually would heal myself up an average of 18,000 each hit that he did. So as he was doing damage to me, Let's see what his melee hits were actually hitting for. So his average melee hit was 51,000, but because I was healing up for almost 20,000 on each one, I was almost cutting those in half. Really a good mix on how this goes, and it really quicken or changes how this spec once ended up playing, to where the faster melee attacking targets would usually end up murdering the shit out of a Death Knight. Getting that additional healing off of each hit makes it to where they're going to play a lot better in that situation. Unlike before, to where, you know, it was always about the larger burst hits so you could heal yourself back up. You actually have a way now on fast physical fights to where you can stop that aggression using the mark for blood, or mark of blood. Using mark of blood, it'll actually allow you to soften those blows by giving a percentage of your health back to you each time they hit. So fast hitting bosses are no longer a major problem with this spec. With this, guys, I hope this helped you out a little bit on what you were looking for. I know I went a little bit more in depth on the logs than I normally end up doing, and that's because there's a lot of big changes that have happened to this spec compared to prior expansions. I hope you got some good information out of this, and with that, as always, I hope you enjoyed yourself, and thanks for watching.